Well, Dallas and Celeste, welcome to the show.
Hello. Happy to.
Hi.
I'm just so excited to have you guys on here because we've known each other for a number of years now.
Yep.
And I think the work you guys are doing is fantastic. And you're such a great fit. We're going to talk about this. You're such a great fit for youth pastors to be able to talk to youth pastors. And so I'm going to start with the obvious questions. Tell us about your background in youth ministry.
Yeah, we both kind of our own like separate background before we got married. So let's you want to share your background in youth ministry, and then I'll share mine. And we'll kind of I'll get into like us together.
Sure. So I was in youth ministry when I was a teenager. I was a student leader, and then I went to Christ for the Nations for youth ministry, and the great school loan market crash happened, and so came home and kind of took over my youth ministry at my church. It was a not great situation because I was not mature enough to handle things, but I did run it. It wasn't what it should have been. Young people mistakes. And then I've been I have served in some way, shape, or form of the church since I was like 14.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And
So
Dallas, how about you?
yeah, well, for me, I started serving my youth ministry as a teenager. My student pastor uh just saw that I needed some guidance, and so he kind of took me under his wing, gave me the opportunity to do some stuff. And when I got out of high school, I was just always hanging out and helping out, serving. And then I went to college to do youth ministry training. I got an actual degree in youth ministry and church ministry, and came home back to Shreveport and started applying to churches everywhere. And nobody wanted me.
Well, that was their loss. Let me just tell you.
Nobody wanted me. And uh after some argumentation with the Lord about certain things, I made some changes on certain things. And then my home church where I grew up in, decided that they needed a kids pastor. I had no idea we didn't have a kids ministry, and they hired me on to be a kids pastor. And again, I was helping out with the youth ministry at the time. And I was like, all right, bet. Let's make this happen. So I became the kids pastor first, which was interesting because I had no training in kids ministry. I had no idea. I didn't become a Christian until I was, 16 years old. So kids ministry thing was completely just oblivious to me, and made it up as I went. And I read the kids ministry like a youth ministry. And then I how about 5 years into it, I think, right, Celeste?
Yeah.
Uh, I I went to my pastor. I was feeling this call that I needed to go into youth ministry, and told my pastor, I was like, "Hey, I need to do this." And that was a scary conversation, because going to your pastor and telling him I need to do this type of thing, it could very easily going, "All right, cool. Consider this your resignation letter. Have a good day." Uh, but
Yeah.
what was cool about it, huh?
I said, okay, bye.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Like it was kind of a scary thing, but I had to do it. And unbeknownst to me, what I didn't know is the Lord was doing a work in my pastor and my associate pastor, who our associate pastor was our youth pastor, and he had been my youth pastor as a young man. And there's some shifting and changing that need to take place. And so he's like, well, I was just talking to Matt, and we were feeling the same thing. And so we made a transition. I became the youth pastor at our church, and passed off the kids ministry to another young lady who had grown up in our church. And about 5 or 6 years after that, my pastor came to me again, said, "Hey, uh, we really need some more stuff with media, and we need to make some other changes take place, and I need you to do that." So Celeste and I stepped out of youth ministry for a good season, and about 6 years, 5 years, right?
5 years.
And focused full time on media, and which turned out to be a blessing because COVID hit, and and but
You,
because I, huh?
you would have made the transition about 2017, so it
Yeah,
was real close.
yeah, real close. But made that transition out, and thankfully I was in this place I was needed to be, because we were able to function as a church a little better. I was able to help navigate some stuff on the media side of things. And then last year, my pastor came to me again, and but we passed off the youth ministry to a person who was actually in my kids' church, and he was in my youth ministry. that I ran, and so he was running it for those 5 years, and we made another kind of shift in the church, and so he's kind of we're kind of across the board in our fellowship as a whole. We're doing this thing called Next Gen Ministry. It's kind of a focus on everything as far as next generation, and so he's kind of taking the spearhead of that.
Mhm.
And but he's focusing primarily on the young adults. And my pastor's like, I want you to step in and take over our youth ministry again, our student ministry. And so for like the last year, Celeste and I've been doing youth ministry again.
You know, youth ministry is like the mafia. It just, I thought I was out, and then it came back and drew me back in, right? It's a thing that those of us who have that calling and have that heart and passion for young people, it's hard to get away from that.
It is.
When we try to run away, and then
Well,
it just pulls you back.
well, we never wanted to go away, and that's the thing. Like the
I'm
philosophy.
talking about me. I was running. I'm just talking about me.
I gotcha. But the philosophy of our church is we have this whole thing called One Serve Team. And it's like,
Yeah.
even though I'm not technically in charge of the student ministry, I was still involved with teenagers like the entire time. Those entire
Sure.
5 years, Celeste and I still, because our heart, that's where we see things, and that's who we gravitate to. And there are kids that, they gravitate towards us, and there are kids that gravitate towards, who are at the time our student pastor. And there's not a competition there. It's just that we're going to reach who we need to reach. And because they're one serve team, one body. And it's just that Jaron had the responsibility of handling the student ministry at the time, and I did. And we still have that today. There's still like, even though like Celeste are technically properly involved in charge of student ministry, there are kids who they don't connect with me and Celeste, but they will connect with Jaron, or they will connect with my associate pastor or somebody else. And we have to be okay with that, because it's not about us. It's about the body of Christ and the kingdom.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So it's not a competition, everybody. Listen, youth pastors, if all the kids don't like you, that's okay. That's why you build a team,
Exactly.
because every kid's not going to like you.
Exactly.
So you gotta be able to work with that. But I also want to point out, before we get into the genesis of Geek Devotions, you do something really cool that I think youth pastors would like to talk about or like to hear about, is that you do a media camp, right? Isn't it like a media camp you do with kids, and you teach them how to make movies and how to work with equipment? Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it started off several years ago in the first round of doing student ministry, where again, my gifting, my skill set is in media. I've been doing it for decades at this point now, and I it's something I enjoy. And I am not a singer. I cannot sing, and don't ask me to. My wife is shaking her
Celeste, can
head.
you confirm? Can you
Can
confirm,
confirm,
Celeste?
not ask.
Celeste, you gave yourself whiplash just now. You need to calm down with the shaking of your head. But, so, like, I can pluck a few strings on guitar, but my gifting is in media and making videos. It's a passion I've had since I was a young man. I actually was inspired by my student pastor, Matt. He's the one first that sat me down to, hey, here's a camera and let's do stuff. And so I was just looking to do stuff to do with my students over the summertime, and I wanted to use my skills. And so we did what I called film school. And the genesis of it was like a 2 week event that we did with them, and we did several things at the time. And I just taught them the basics of camera work. Excuse me, camera work and basic editing and stuff like that, just principles. And I gave them some guidelines and let them be creative. I love, and Celeste does too. We love seeing this little light bulb come off on a kid's head and go, let me make this happen. And this past year we've done it again. It was kind of broke it up. We had an abbreviated time. We do this camp at a church called Hero Academy, and it's a kids camp that we do on campus. And our students are some of the primary leaders, and we haven't had a chance, because we're kind of in a rebuilding year with our students, to really just spend time together, really outside of youth. And there's something about spending a long time together, not just an hour in youth where, okay, we're sitting here worshiping and we're listening to a sermon. Those are great things. Those are spiritual things, but that's not where the koinonia takes place. What takes place is when we're doing life, when we're in a small group talking, when we're laughing, when we're doing stuff. And so before Hero Academy, I did a 3-day mini film school with them. It was 8-hour long days. And we did the basics of filming and everything like that. And it really did so foster that relationship with our students together, to know each other, to see each other a little bit differently. And then of course on the back end of it, we had the camp that we did. And with the camp we do with Hero Academy, the students actually spend the night at the church grounds. So for them, it's their mission trip. So Sunday starts the trip, and they spend the night and into all the way until we're done with the camp. And it was just a really great bonding time all together for them.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love it. So let's go ahead and get into the geeky stuff, shall we? Let's start with the beginnings of where did Geek Devotions come from? And feel free to elaborate with your own geeky backgrounds and what you geek out about.
Yeah. Celeste, what's your geeky background?
I actually have an interesting geeky background because I was not necessarily a geek until I was about 16. I loved to read, but when I was 16, my mom met and married a man who is the king of the nerds. And so he realized I liked to read. He liked to read. And he decided to start sharing some of that with me. And so he would go, "Hey, I really think you'd like this. I really think you'd like this." And so he got me into Superman. He got me into Iron Man and all of the things. And so
Mm,
Star Trek and Star Wars, and we can have whole conversations with him, um, just about all of the geek stuff. So it was around the same time that episode 3 came out,
mm.
and it's probably the geekiest thing my mom has ever done. We watched because we'd never seen Star Wars, and my mom in the newlywed phase was like, "Oh, sure, let's watch it together as a family." Um, she she ended up liking it. She likes Star Wars,
Yeah.
but we watched episode 4, 5, 6, and then we watched episode 1 and 2, and we went and saw 3 in theaters.
It's a good
So
one.
yeah, it was, and like my mom didn't know until like 2 days before we were going to go see the movie who Vader was. She had missed that boat. Um, and so we almost, me and my dad almost strangled one of my cousins because they were like, "Well, of course everyone knows this." We're like, "Shut up. We're going to pin you to the wall if you don't stop talking."
That's right. That's right. You can't spoil things. Don't spoil things.
Um,
Um, what about you, Dallas? How did your geekiness start?
Uh,
What did you what did you geek out on?
yeah, I mean, mine started off as just a child, man. I grew up watching like old school anime, like Voltron, and several other things, Battle for the Planets, um, and it just kind of grew from there. One of my the very first movie I remember seeing in theaters was 1989 Batman, and
Mm,
my dad took me to see it for my birthday, and I thought it was. I remember it was a big ordeal for me. I was 5 years old going to the theaters with my dad. We watched Batman, and when we came home, and my house was decorated with Batman stuff, and my mom threw a big birthday party for me. It was all Batman themed, and that kind of started my love for Batman as a kid. And obviously grew up watching X-Men, and I was not a good reader. I still am not a great reader. Um, but my mom, in trying to help me to learn to read, she knew that I liked superheroes, so she started getting me comics, and I started getting into all that kind of stuff. So I grew up reading a lot of comics as a way to just learn to read, and I just fell in love with the stories. As a kid, um, I wasn't. I stood out a little bit. I was different from the other kids. I'm not athletic. I was born with a disability that cuts me from being able to run and do certain things like other kids did, and I always felt like an outcast. And I was bullied some in school, and I found hope, and I found some solace in these characters I could relate to in the comics growing up, and they encouraged me in different ways. And so that was kind of my love affair with it. And I got into high school, and I began to really understand what anime was. And I had friends who questionable backgrounds and had questionable ways of obtaining anime, and they sort of passed me VHS tapes and stuff like that, and I just fell in love with anime, and just kind of helped with everything else with what I was doing. And so that's kind of my background in quote unquote geekdom as a whole.
sure, sure. And so so now you have this geekiness here, and it starts to connect with your faith at
Hmm.
some point. So tell me how Geek Devotions, when did you say to yourself, there's a lot of students who like this stuff, and there's a lot of adults, young adults who like this stuff. How do we put these things together? Where how do they connect?
I mean, a lot of it was like it was several series of events for me. Um, it again, I just being what I do as a kids pastor and as a youth pastor is always like relating stuff to what the kids saw and did, and I'm really good at it. Like I don't at the risk of tooting my own horn, I'm really good at taking just random stuff and just kind of point it back to the Lord. You know, there's that old stupid joke about youth pastors turning everything into a sermon illustration, and
True.
it's I mean a lot of them do, but I'm pretty good at making it make sense and and not being too cheesy. But I remember I was walking through the hall of one of our local schools. I was helping out with a club that was on campus and a Christian club. And as I'm walking through, I looked to the right, and there was this little girl sitting in a corner by herself, just trying, and she was just trying to block the world out. And she just wasn't, she was just alone. She was by herself. And I have a tendency to look for those kids, to see those kids, and because I felt that when I was a kid. And she's sitting there, and she has this backpack with a character named Cone, Kon, and it's from an anime called Bleach. And I recognize Cone, and I was like, "Hey, that's Cone. That's cool." And so she kind of looked at me like, "Who is this grown man? And how does he know who Cone is?" So we talk and we laugh a little bit about it. And I was like, "Hey, I'm going over here to this club. You want to come hang out? They're gonna have pizza." And so she's like, "Sure." So I came, and she was able to connect with other kids. It was a really cool thing, and that really struck me at that point. And there were several little different connectors going on where I'd just see things in geek culture, and I'd be like, I'd relate it to. And at the time, a lot of our youth were very jockish, very sporty type people. They weren't really too in geek culture, but there was things that I had inside of me that I needed to get out. And then came GeekCon. Celeste, you want to pick up the story from there?
Sure. So we were engaged. Um, and our city had its first convention. And we went in to stand in line because we had had the next town over had a convention. So we knew, you get there early, you stand in line. And so we were there at like 6 a.m. We're just standing, we're talking to people, talking about life and whatnot, and talking about the fact that we're about to get married, talking about the fact that Dallas is a pastor, just generally talking. And someone came up to along the sidelines to what would you call it? Heckle? Protest.
Oh,
Protest is a better word.
yeah, yeah.
Protest the con. And they were yelling and screaming and telling people they were going to hell. And the crowd was going, "We know." Um, but because we had been there and we had been having civil conversation and we've been talking to people, and they looked at Dallas and I and went, "Hey, you're a pastor." And Dallas goes, "Yeah." And they go, "Well, are you going to yell at us?" Dallas goes, "Will it help?" And they go, "Well, no." And he goes, "No, I'm just here for the con. Like, I'll tell you about Jesus, but I'm not going to yell at you about it." And so that kind of sparked something in both of us.
Yeah.
Um, that also we had been having our marriage counseling, and in like one or two of the sessions right before that, our pastor had said something to the effect of, "You two are going to have your own ministry." And I think he was talking about like together as a married couple, you have a ministry outside of the church to each other. But I'm real literal, and so I went, "Okay, we're going to have a ministry outside the church." And so I started praying into it. But it stuck with us and it bothered us
Yeah.
because it's people being told that they're wrong without being told about the love of God.
We walked on that con floor right after that, and it's an exhilarating situation. It was our very first con, and there's something about being in an atmosphere in a room where people get it, where everyone is on the same page and they understand it. And so there was excitement for us. We're like, "Hey, we're here." And this is the thing that a lot of people that they feel lost, they feel alone, and they go to geekdom for some comfort. They show up these cons. That's what they're feeling, and we're there, and and there's this sadness that we had because we see these people and there's nobody here to show them the love of Christ, to show them hope. And the guys who know the hope, love, and hope of Christ, we hope, are on the street corner and they're just screaming at them. Like there's no hope in the message. It's just, you're going to hell. And which, again, yes, that's a biblical thing, but you're not showing them the hope of Jesus. You're just demeaning them at this point. And the guy he started saying some weird stuff also, but it bothered us. And we're like, well, we're here. We're on the floor. We speak the language of the culture. Why aren't we doing something about it? And so that's when she and I started talking about it, and we had to get through the marriage portion first and get married. And then we spent like 6 months of just research and prayer and figuring out not just what to do, but how to do it. And 6 months later, we sat down and we filmed our first episodes of Geek Devotions. And as of this upcoming Friday of us filming, it will officially be 8 straight years of a new devotion every single Friday coming on our YouTube channel.
Wow, that is fantastic. That is fantastic. And yes, please listen, geekdevotions.com, everybody. Geekdevotions.com. You can buy there, you can connect to all the things there. What's the channel? Just so and I know we're gonna do it at the end too, but just go ahead and spit out the channel for everybody as well.
Geek Devotions.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Just make sure. So in doing this for 8 years, how are you doing it? How are you using Geek Devotions now, to whether it's at a con or some other things? How are you using it to reach out to those maybe who don't know Christ? And do you have any stories of those that maybe you've connected with in that culture or at cons or just online, of people who are into the geek culture and are discovering you guys and going, hey, what is this?
My favorite one at the moment, because there's always going to be another favorite one, is we have this little girl. I say little girl. She is a grown woman with a baby, but she found us through another organization that we partner with occasionally, and she had just been saved. Like, she had just found Jesus, lived in a home that they were like, okay, cool, you can follow Jesus, but we're not going to. She was the only Christian in her house. So our devotions, our streams, our willingness to talk was her only outlet for Christ.
Yeah.
And so we feel like she has grown up with us, because legitimately, like, she went from asking us about algebra questions to going, can I have your address so I can invite you to the wedding, to she hopped on our stream a few months ago and she goes, hey guys, I'm in labor, just chilling. And we're like, why are you on stream? And she's like, well, it's in between the contractions. I'm fine right now. No, baby, go concentrate on birthing a baby.
A baby born on your stream would have been
No,
the most viral thing that could have ever happened, I think.
Don't say it like that though, because that sounds didn't happen. But yeah, by the end of the night, she's like, okay, bye. And we're like, bye, we're praying for you.
Oh my goodness. And what what drew her in? Was there something, was it a video? Was it was it something she saw?
We were in the middle of a Bible study with Geeks Under Grace on the new Spider-Man at the time. One of the is it Holland?
Yeah, Tom Holland movies.
Tom Holland. It was one of the new Tom Holland ones. And so we had written it. And so we were leading. I think we wrote that one. Did we write that one?
Yeah, we wrote it.
Okay. I was like, don't let me take credit from somebody. And so we were kind of leading it as an example of what you could do with it. And a bunch of other staff members were there, and it was on YouTube Live. And so she jumped in the chat because she really liked Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, you never know what's going to draw somebody in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What their jam is, right? It could be anything.
Yeah, definitely. We And there's several small stories like that that we could share about just people who they just found us through one way or another and they connected and they're like, hey, this is cool. We have one dude that's in our community that, man, he loves what we do and he supports us, and he got to us because I did a video comparing Tony Chachere's to Old Bay seasoning. and
Yeah.
he was like, this is cool. And so he just hung out with us. And then, then like we started going to cons a couple years ago, having an actual booth there. But beforehand, we would just go and just bring our camera and interview people. And there was a guy that we met, really good guy, and he was a cosplayer. He always cosplayed as Indiana Jones. That was his thing. He wanted to be an archaeologist and all sorts of stuff. And we saw him at the con every single year. And that's part of the thing is like, that's the great thing about going to the same con on a regular basis is you develop a community of people like, hey, I remember you from last year. Da, da, da. And so we saw him every year. And one of the year, it was the second year we had a booth. It was during the COVID year. He came up to our booth. He goes, hey, I want to tell you guys something. He goes, I've been watching you guys, following you guys for several years. And you've challenged me and encouraged me. And he goes, what you guys have been saying stuck with me. And he goes, and then about a month, 2 months ago, I was channel flipping and there was an old Billy Graham sermon going on. And I gave my life to Jesus right there in my living room. And you guys were part of that journey. And he was just saying thanks for that. And again, it's just, we're just doing life with people.
That's incredible though, that you guys that through the ministry of Geek Devotions, you laid some of the groundwork. You plowed some of the soil with him. And
Mhm.
then for that to happen later, created the opportunity for him to know the Lord through Billy Graham coming on TV. That is so wild, isn't it? How God does stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I want to encourage youth pastors who are listening and watching right now. I know you want to discount some of these things. You want to say, well, no, this stuff is not for me and so forth. Let me tell you something. God can use a lot of things, and we're going
Yeah.
to get into that. So I just want to encourage youth pastors, hang with us here and listen, because there's a lot of these things that we're going to get into that may be helpful for your youth ministry, things that they're going to talk about, because we can't, once again, I am not the geekiest person in the world. I have a lot of, geeky parts of me.
Or
Anime
you
is
play
about
D&D. You are a geek. You are the
That's
king of
true.
geek.
That's true. That's true. I am. I am. My background, my geekiness is in role playing games, comics. In fact, I just bought some comics today.
My dude.
I was at a antique shop, and I used to collect a series called Grimjack
Oh
from
yeah.
First Comics, and I'm now trying to complete my set. So I found about 11 comics there that I need. So, but that's for another show. I'll start my geek podcast at some point.
Right.
But I just want to encourage youth pastors. We're going to dive into this about how you can use some of these things with your kids. And I probably anime wise, probably the only thing that I've really gotten into at some point was probably My Hero Academia.
Yeah.
And I learned though, because I used this at camp. I mean, I preached it. I mean, it wound up in my messages. And here's where I stopped. I stopped because there was this girl there. Look, I have limited knowledge, right, of anime. But if you say something about anime to somebody who does not have limited knowledge, in fact, they have all knowledge,
Right.
and they want to talk to you about it
Yep.
for hours.
Oh
Yep.
yeah.
And they will ask you, have you watched the episode yet? Have you watched this season yet? And I just said, oh wow, I just don't have the bandwidth for this. I just and I understand, youth pastors, listen to me. I understand, once you're in it, you're like, okay, it's now a whole thing.
Right.
um but it's worth it to investigate, and that's kind of where I want to shift now, is talk about what trends and maybe fads, or maybe not fads, but more like trends, maybe that you're seeing in geek culture that youth pastors need to be aware of, both, positive or negative, maybe, but in manga, or, in shows, in animes, and, let me, what's going on in the world today that you think, hey, let's pay attention to this, both for the positive and the negative, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, anime is definitely one of those things that's on the rise of popularity.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it's starting to become a little mainstream, a lot bigger. You have even like major music stars who and athletes who I would say they grew up in the midst of the anime revolution, if you will, of the early 2000s, and they're presenting that in their music and in their stuff. There was a what was his name? Oh my gosh, I can't remember. There was a track star who was in the Olympics several years ago, and before he started, he sat down and he took a position that was specifically to resemble Luffy from One Piece, which is like one of the longest running animes and mangas that's out there. And so it started to become in pop culture a lot more. Um, and so it is definitely one of those things you need to be aware of. And in anime itself, there's a lot of different trends that are taking place. One of the things that it's almost become a joke now. It's a genre called isekai, and I understand why it's become popular, and it's because the whole idea of isekai is that you have a person who is magically transported to another world, and uh, now what happens in the place? Sometimes they get transported, and it's almost like they're in a video game, and there's like video game sets like that. Some of them it's almost like a role playing game type situation. They've been transported. Sometimes it's just another place. Period. And I understand why it is because so many people, that's what they need to get away. They're where we live in a world where it's scary and there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of doubts and nobody really wants to listen. And a lot of these, I mean, this was for me, and I found hope because the characters I associated with, they were the outcasts, but they found community. They found people that would encourage them. And so that's one aspect of anime that I think that youth pastors should keep an eye out, is not in a negative way, but just in a, hey, this is what the kids are looking for. And now there's 1,000 anime out there.
There are. I can attest that Netflix tells me what's out there. Uh, there's tons of them on there, for
Yeah.
sure. I will say this, that currently Dungeon Delicious is probably my jam. And you can tell why that would be my jam, uh, that's my thing. I think that's a very clever show. I think there's a lot of cool things that are happening, and I think there's something to be learned from it. I believe that if I were to use it, I think there's a translation there in some ways
Yeah.
that I could use that. Is there anything that youth pastors need to be aware of that you say, if you hear a kid talk about this, that maybe means something, that maybe that if they hear these buzzwords, like, because there's, I'm sure, and once again, I'm not an anime aficionado. I know very little, so I would not be able to tell you what to look out for or not to look out for. But maybe, certain animes that kids are watching are for certain reasons, and what have you. What would you say, and say, hey, maybe there's some things you need to be listening for in your youth group when they start talking about things that you don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, there's your typical, I say typical, there are genres of anime that nobody needs to be really watching. There's the overall term, which is hentai, which is porn. And then, but out of that, there's other things. There's a term called yuri. There's a term called ichi, and there's a lot of inappropriate things that take place in those genres that you need to be very careful and be mindful of, because that's and something like there are stories that come off as wholesome, but there is some different elements in there are inappropriate, that don't need to be consumed by children, much less adults. And so those are the buzzwords I would say specifically, but I don't know, again, just because geekdom is so fast. I mean, there's stuff like Celeste, there are book culture, there's a whole book culture out there.
Oh yeah.
And what are some of the stuff you're telling me about that's just like this, there's no reason, like there was a whole thing about a book that was on the shelves. It looks like a young adult teen fiction book, but it's like super inappropriate.
There is a genre of books, a classification of books called YA,
Yeah.
and that is young adult. The problem with that is that there has been this subgenre coming out of YA, and for the longest time it did not have a name. So all of these things were considered YA. YA stories, but with more adult themes than what you would want your teenagers reading. And it's now being called new adult, but some of the books are still in the wrong area. So, um, specifically, if you have a reader and they are reading what they call romantasy, maybe do some googling and find out what's the content of that. Because just off the top of my head, A Court of Thorns and Roses, uh, Fourth Wing are all good fantasy stories, but if you are not an adult and do not have the capabilities to go, I am not going to read this, let me skip it.
Yeah.
It's not something you need to be taking in.
Yeah. I mean, if the kid says something or anybody says anything, because we're talking about teenagers, but adults also,
Sure.
the idea that, oh, well, it's the book's kind of spicy. That's a kind of word people use. It's
Yeah.
spicy. That generally means adult content in it that does not need to be present. And it gets me a little bit because like we people will rail on it with movies and TV shows and even manga, but they seem to be okay with it if it's a book, just a plain book. And I'm just like, no, it's still doing the same thing for you.
There was a whole community of people on Book Talk, on TikTok, the book side of TikTok, that have, I don't know how to describe what happened, but there was one particular lady who was like the champion of the ice hockey romances. She was like, these are amazing. And so they started assigning, like, taking fiction into reality. And they started going, oh, well, this hockey player looks like this. And she got really inappropriate, and things kind of blew up when the hockey player's wife was like, hey, this is my husband. Please stop.
Right.
So there's also that. If your kids are reading hockey romances, maybe tell their parents.
Well, okay, first of all, the fact that there's hockey romances
Oh yeah.
that
Oh yeah.
exist, that is the first I have ever heard of that.
There are
And that is anime?
No,
No,
that's books.
Okay.
It's just books.
It's
That's-
just books in the young adult section,
Yeah.
section called hockey romances.
they're in with the romances, but there are entire genres of books,
Oh.
and there are young girls. We have a girl in our youth group who was reading one, and I went, "Are you reading the sections?" And she goes, "No, no, I skipped that." And I'm going, well, "Do you?" But I'm not her mom, so.
Sure.
But she was surprised that I knew what she was talking about. So just
Yeah.
just having knowledge is
Yeah.
helpful.
Sure.
And the thing is, like, and this is what I tell parents, just pay attention. Like,
Yeah.
ask questions. Like, what are you watching? What are you listening to? And youth pastor, our job as youth pastors is not to parent and to police the children. Our job is to equip parents, to equip the church, and help guide the students into what God has for them. But there's a level of us taking interest in what they have and going, well, what are you into? What are you listening to? And listening, not trying to come back quickly with like, oh, well, this or that, but just listening to them
Mm-hmm.
and going and just like, what are they listening to? Who are they watching? And trying to understand even why they're into that and what's taking place. Not making a snap judgment, not jumping off the bandwagon. I remember I had a youth leader and I love him to death and I'll always respect him. But he my friend and I were looking at some Pokemon cards when we were teenagers and he just went off on us. I'm like, for reals? And of course, this is the height of the Pokemon is of Satan disinformation age that was taking place. So
D. Hey, let me tell you, and nobody probably that listens to this podcast knows this, but I had a pastor one time, if I'm lying, I'm dying, did a 15-minute report
Orale.
on Pokemon to the congregation. And I'm just sitting there shrinking in my chair as I'm looking at, because he's talking about Pokemon Go. And the reason that happened was I made our church a Pokemon Go stop.
Oh no.
And kids were rolling up. And so anyway, that got out. And then there were required a 15-minute dissertation on that. And I'm just looking at my kids going, just shrugging my shoulders, going, I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. I can't. I just can't.
That's the thing. And this is what I would recommend. Because again, a lot of your guys are listening. They're young pastors, young youth leaders. And the thing is, we have to submit to our authority.
Yeah.
So if the lead pastor says this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen. But what I've developed a relationship with my lead pastor, and he trusts me. That we almost have a relationship of ask for forgiveness later with certain projects, but but for most projects that I do here, and I say that jokingly, that was when we were doing filming stuff back in the day. It was just like, I don't want to know, just go with it. But for things that he's genuinely has questions about, um, I go and look into it. I do research into it. Years ago, there was this whole, and it pops up every so often. It's actually the most viewed article on my website. And it's, is Monster Energy drinks of the devil? Is Monster Energy of the devil?
I remember this.
And there's a video of this crazy lady who she goes on this whole rant about the evils of it. It's 666. And so he calls me, and I being in charge of the youth ministry ran the coffee shop there. So therefore I was in charge of the coffee shop, and our coffee shop at the church had Monster Energy drinks. And so he's like, I need to know what's going on. So I did the research. I did the legwork and did a deep dive. I found the original publishing company, everything. And plot twist or cliff notes, it's not demonic. Enjoy your energy drink. Don't drink too many, your heart will explode. But anyways,
That it will.
Moderation.
that being said, with stuff like Pokemon, even there was a question about Pokemon, and he had read some article about something, and I said, "All right, well, I'm going to look into it." And I looked into it, and the article that he had heard about has circulated the church world is completely false and fake, and it was just a troll thing. But a lot of pastors, again, they read it. It looks like a credible source. They don't have time to go into it. They just move on. So one of the things I encourage people is do your own research and then have honest conversations with your pastors. But hey, this is what this is. This is what this is not. But at the same time, remember, you are under authority. You are not the lead pastor. If your pastor says, I get it, but no, we have to respect that. We have to move on and do that. My pastor, he trusts Celeste and I enough to go, all right, well, I know you guys are going to do what you need to do. And as long as what this is become the main thrust of everything, we're fine with that. I remember a couple of years ago, one of our leaders wanted to do a Smash Bros tournament for a fundraiser. And he's like, well, what is that? And he was concerned about it. And the thing is, he didn't grow up with video games. His daughters weren't into video games, so he doesn't know necessarily what's what. And so we had explained to him, was like, it's not a big deal. And we walked him through it, and he's like, oh, okay, cool. And that's a testament about who my pastor is he's willing to listen to us and trust us. Not everyone has that situation, but regardless, if my pastor went, we're not going to do that, it's off the table. Plain and simple. I'm not going to play games with that because he's in charge of the house.
And it's no different than I'm a little bit older than you guys, but it was the same thing for heavy metal, for Christian heavy metal especially. Then you wanted to introduce a new idea or a new thought, and if you can't discern, if you don't have the information to discern between, no, this is Christian heavy metal and this is the other metal, well, then there's going to be conflict. And I find too, even in the role-playing community too, there's a lot of youth pastors who want to play D&D with their groups or things like that. Just saw a post on that recently. And I'm gonna message that young man and say, or young lady, and say, if you're gonna do it, I probably would not do it at the church. I would probably not. And here's why. I just say, look, I think you have to separate business and pleasure. I think because, like you said, it's such a great point. Both of you made, Dallas and Celeste, is the fact that not everything is you as a youth pastor. If you're young and watching and listening to this, you are informed. You see things. You have your own personal likes as far as maybe anime or manga or any of these things. And you maybe don't see a problem with it, but it can cause a whole bunch of chaos. And we have these past 60 years of history of church history, and probably more than that. But in our modern era, when you are trying to introduce new cultural things, the results are not always what you think they're going to be. Like putting your church and making your church a Pokemon Go spot. That did not work out quite like I thought it was going to work out. And so, I think you have to, like you said, you have to use discernment. So if you're watching this, youth pastor, listening to this, use some discernment before you decide to use something, which brings me to this. What are some things then, because I think most of our youth pastors are probably normies when it comes to some of these things, right? And what are some things that they could check out? And what are some things, what are some things that you think, hey, this is kind of very lesson forward, that you could watch this if it's an anime or if it's manga or whatever it is, and say, there's some things to be drawn from this, that could be drawn from this, should you choose to do that. So what are some things you recommend? And also throw in there how you do that. I'd like to know, give the youth pastor a little information. It's like, okay, here are the things that you could draw. Here's some names of some things you could look at, that if you have kids that are involved in that, I wouldn't, if your kids are not, none of your kids are involved in anime, maybe not do anime
Yeah.
because you're just going to look at you strange.
Right.
But if you do have a culture of that within your group somehow, and you want to use that, tell us some of the things that they maybe could connect with, and then how do you go about drawing about those spiritual lessons
Mhm.
from some of this content?
Well, before we answer that, I do want to. Step one is find out what your kids are actually doing and listening to. If your students aren't into comic books, I mean, you can introduce them to comic books, but unless they're just really into it, don't make it a thrust. If your kids aren't into video games, don't make it a thrust.
Yeah.
And just you got to know your community. I didn't do a ton of geek stuff when we were youth pastors the first time because most of our kids were not into that. We had some who were into that, but they weren't necessarily into that totally. We have a few more kids this time around that they're nerdy. I got one little girl who she absolutely loves Spider-Man, and she has extremely valid and good reasons as to why each Spider-Man is good and not good in certain ways, and what aspects of Peter Parker they highlight the best. And I got other kids who are really into manga and stuff like that. But first off, I would say know what your kids are into, and that takes, again, like I said this a couple times already, listen to them. Don't talk to answer, but just listen. And then I love doing this. I like to sit down with kids, like, tell me about this, and just let them run. The
Mm.
I love hearing people talk about what they're passionate about. I really do. It lights me up. I don't know a thing about wrestling, but I got a kid in my youth group that loves wrestling, and dude, he will go off. And I learned a lot just from listening to him.
Yeah, I had a kid like that too.
Yeah. So Celeste, what are some resources right off the bat that you can recommend?
I would say once you know what they're into, look and see if you can find a geek ministry that deals with that. We
Mhm.
are very
You mean like Geek Devotions?
similar. Yes. We with
Okay, just throw that out there.
Well, with Geek Devotions, we are very broad because Dallas and I are into a lot of things. I read all the time. Dallas is into comic books. We're into movies. We watch all of the things. So Geek Devotions follows our interests. But there are geek ministries out there that are more niche.
Yeah.
Like there's a podcast called Beneath the Tangles,
Mhm.
and they are believers. And so if you have kids that are into anime, check out Beneath the Tangles because and contact them and go, what is this? What is that? I'm sure they would be more than willing to help. Obviously, Dallas and I would be as well, but we are into anime, but we're not into a lot of anime, if that makes sense. Like we are, but we're not. We only have so many hours in a day.
Right.
Yes.
Find resources. That would be my thing. Also, if they're into something that you're into or that you're not into, give it a try.
Yeah.
One of our kids is really into a particular book series called Wings of Fire, and
Mhm.
it has dragons in it. I like dragons and I like books. So
Yes.
I listened to the first like 3 audiobooks. Gonna get back to listening to them because it was an interesting little story. But now he and I can have conversations about that
Yeah.
because I know who he's talking about. If you show an interest in what they are interested in, even in its basest format, that is going to do a lot for building a relationship, which then means that they'll come to you when things happen.
Yeah, definitely. And like us, there's a lot of groups out there. Beneath the Tangles, she said, it was one of them. Again, they have a whole website, beneath-the-tangles.com. Fantastic group of individuals. They talk about anime, manga, cosplaying. They have a young lady who leads their kind of cosplay division talking about it, stuff like that. There's a group that we're part of. We haven't had a chance to do a lot of stuff with them as of late, but they're amazing, called Geeks Under Grace, which is geeksundergrace.com. And they do more of the review side of things. So they review anime, they review books and video games and comics and stuff like that. But there's other ones. There's a website called christandpopculture.com. They got some really good stuff. There's another group, and these guys, they're pretty big. LoveThy Nerd. They're
Yeah.
pretty awesome. And they do a whole bunch of, they actually do a lot more stuff that like we want to do. Like they're on the con floor doing stuff all the time, and a lot of respect for them. There's also a podcast called The Christian Nerd that's out there, and then there's another group that they're called Geeky Guys For God. And they are actually, as a recording of this right now, they're on the floor of the San Diego Comic Con, which is kind of like the mecca of geek culture. And they got a booth there, and they got a team that's outside passing out water bottles, which is something I want
Wow.
to do, but we can't because of rules with our convention. But San Diego Comic Con is 1,000 degrees because it's San Diego, and the
And there's
line,
12,000 people there.
yeah, and the line's like 3 blocks long. So they're out there handing out waters and just encouraging people, doing some grade A good stuff. I'm proud of them. So there's a plethora of geek ministries that are out there doing some stuff, not including just like podcasts that are just they're geeky in nature and they're ran by Christians. We're part of a network called Culture Box, and it's a whole bunch of guys like that. We got there's a whole animation podcast called The Cellcast. There's a one called Retro Rewind Podcast. There's one called um oh my goodness, my brain just stopped functioning. The Rushmore Show, which is it's two dudes and they give their top four of any topic whatsoever. It's like as in like Mount Rushmore, the top four.
Sure. Sure.
Fantastic guys, love them to death. They actually run in some similar circles you and I run, Paul. And
Okay.
but they're Christians. And now the show itself it's not necessarily a Christian show. They're not like we're going to tell you about Jesus. But these guys are very, very Christian, and they show Christ in different ways. And so there's a lot of stuff out there. You just have to be willing to kind of look through it all.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit then too, because you guys produce a lot of content on your YouTube channel, Geek Devotions. Look for it. I see you do anime breakdowns. You do a devotion. I think Celeste does a number of these. Did you do the last one, Celeste? Did you do the last? I want to say that you did the last anime devotion I saw, I should say.
Just did one on Kaiju number 8, which is
Okay.
that has its first season has just finished. And so that one's out there. I do a lot of the more girly animes.
Well, listen, girls are, girls love it.
Yeah.
True.
How do you approach it that when you're looking at it, and Celeste does a great job as well as Dallas. I'll say Celeste is better though. She does a great job of breaking down of the things and doing. How do you approach it when you're looking at it worldview wise and you're looking at this? You say, how do I make a devotion out of this? How do you what's your process? Because I know that there are youth pastors who will say, well, how can I translate or how can I draw from this maybe to do something like that to reach a particular kid in my youth ministry?
I think that for me, like the process of doing a devotion, it just depends. Like sometimes we go in going, I need a devotion off of this because we're trying to hit algorithm and get people to see our stuff so that we
Yes.
can spread the word better.
Yes.
Because there is that logistical side of this particular type of ministry, but sometimes it's just there.
Mhm.
Like we're behind on My Hero Academia, and
Don't tell that girl from camp. She'll be mad at us.
she'll say, but we are behind, and so we were just watching an episode, and it was nothing more than a recap episode, but it was highlighting a young man who was protecting somebody else, and it was from the perspective of the person being protected, and the person was basically going, I need you to run so I can protect you. And it was sacrificial in it. And so my brain immediately goes, oh, that's kind of like what Jesus did for us.
Mm.
Like, I'm not going to write a devotion off of that. We're going to catch up. That is so far behind that we'll do nothing for our numbers. I'm not doing another devotion until after we're already in a theme month. Like, it's just, you have to look for it. But when I was a teenager in youth group, my youth pastor told me, if you can't bring Jesus with you, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Mm.
And for them, it was a conviction against certain things that are not necessarily inappropriate, but the way they were doing things were.
Yeah.
And so for them, they gave up a lot of things that were geeky in nature. But I've always approached things with a, can I do this with Jesus sitting next to me?
Mm-hmm.
Would I be ashamed?
Yeah.
And I also look at it as a, what can God say to me through this?
Yeah.
Because if it's not feeding me in some way, even if it's just a, I need something dumb. I have my comfort show. Dallas knows that things are not good with me mentally or physically, or something is wrong if he comes home and I'm watching Hanakimi, because that is my comfort show. I've
Yep.
watched it so many times. I can tell you quotes from it, even though it's not in English. Like, so but it's just it's not a matter of how do I pull this. It's just looking for natural things.
Yeah.
That are
Well, having good Bible knowledge, first of all, is if you know your Bible, you're going to see things
right.
that nobody else would see, maybe, but because you're making you're it's popping off the screen. Like for me, I'll go to the grave with this, that Taken is the story of the prodigal son and God chasing after uh his daughter.
That works.
I still need to see Taken, but I'm impressed.
Because she disobeys her father,
Right.
it's in a hot mess, and then the father spends the rest of the movie trying to get her back. And
That works.
to me, I'm like, that's 100% the prodigal son and God coming after her,
Right.
and destroying every villain that would keep her from him.
Almost
So
like a
when
reckless love. Oh wait, we can't sing about that song.
you could listen. Shall we talk about Sloppy Wet Kiss then? If we're gonna go there, you know. Um,
Oh,
Dow's, do you have any other input as far as
yeah.
when you create a devotion out of something cultural and saying, okay,
Yeah, I mean,
is this shareable? Is this something I can do?
first off, I mean, we always go based off our convictions, and I know when people think we're just watching whatever comes across the screen. It's not that. Like, we have convictions, we have things that there are solid things that are black and white that are in the Word of God, and there are things that I'm like, I can't do this, and Celeste can't do this, and we honor those things. And with the rest of our team, we hold convictions. We to the point we we ran into an issue because we were trying to do an episode of one of our podcasts, The Bottom Shelf, and there were four of us, and all four of us have different convictions about certain things, but we were always going to honor those things, and we just kept hitting roadblock over certain things, and we were running into issues with that. So always, what is the Lord saying? What has He convicted you about? If the Lord says you shall not do this, and you do that, that's sin. Don't do that. There are things that, Paul, you're really into role-playing games and D&D, and there's some people that they feel convicted by it, they just can't handle that.
Right.
If they were to go out and play, that would be wrong.
That's right.
On them. That being said, keeping in mind that we always hold our convictions tightly, I'm very cautious about things. It's something you point out, if you know the Word of God, it's going to come out. And um and the thing is, these are all created works, but our God's a creative God. If you look at heaven and nature, God is very creative, and He's created so many things, and the Bible tells us that nature itself cries out in glory of God. So creativity itself is an expression to God. And so I look for that. I look for those things. And these secular artists that are writing these stories, that are drawing these pictures, that are coming up with these video games, while they may not intentionally trying to glorify Christ with what they do, there is a fingerprint of God's creativity that's in there by nature of man being created from the dust. Every person God's created, His fingerprint is on them, His DNA is there. They just aren't walking in that identity as a son and daughter in Christ because they have not accepted the sacrifice of Christ. But He still cries out through them. We carry traits of of our Father in heaven. Whether we're walking in that identity, that's a whole other conversation. But there are
Right.
traits. And so his creativity, his message, his grace is expressed through all things. And so again, as long as it's not violating our convictions and some biblical standards that Celeste and I have for ourselves, I go to a thing and I go, okay, I want to be entertained, obviously, but what's the Lord saying as I'm watching this? And it's kind of those things like we've been doing this for so long, we see things now, but it is a matter of like we're intentional, like Celeste said, like we're looking for moments, we're looking for things that make sense, and sometimes it's stuff that hits us personally.
Yeah.
I was in some meetings today with some young ministers, and by young I mean they're like from 14 to 19 years old, and the speaker was saying, hey, look, don't study just for somebody else. Don't read your Bible just to preach a sermon. You need to study the Word of God for yourself. So when I'm watching stuff, sometimes it's not for somebody else. It's hitting me, my feels. It's hitting where I'm at, and so then we
Yeah.
can be there.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Is that when we're looking at things, you don't have to go, youth pastors, you don't have to go watch anime and go find something. We're not even encouraging you necessarily to go out and say, look, you need to go watch anime and be
Right.
Yeah.
we're saying, look, if the opportunity is there and you don't even have to make it a sermon, you don't have to any of those things. But like Dallas and Celeste said, get to know your students. Get to know them, and if they have a particular hobby or a particularly thing that they geek out about, you don't have to make a lesson out of it. You just have to, you may know something about it and have a conversation where it comes up, and you're able to minister within the context of that. So tell us then, guys, about what all Geek Devotions offers, because I know that you guys do a lot of things. I want everybody to go check you guys out. But tell us a little bit about the things that Geek Devotions offers, and how these folks can participate in those things.
Another hour-long podcast.
All the things.
All the things.
We have multiple podcasts covering different things. We have one called The Bottom Shelf, where we cover terrible movies, truly terrible movies. We've been in a wormhole recently in the story of the show that we've been watching movies that were good, and that's been a nice little break. But then we also have a show called The Gundam Watch, where Dallas is introducing a friend of ours to an anime called Gundam. It's a whole franchise. There's multiple of them. We read Allegedly, where it's three people who have very different book tastes recommending books to other people. On the podcast, I have read more sad books than I ever wanted to, thanks to one of the the people, because she likes books that make you think, whereas I come to books for a story. And so there's been some stuff where I'm like, why am I reading this? Why?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. In addition to the podcast, you guys do on Twitch, you guys do live streams
every Monday night. It's called our Play and Pray, and as of right now, it's on Monday nights. And we start off with a Bible study, and then we play video games or we do art, stuff like that. But our big rule throughout the entirety of it is that while we're playing video games, if you need prayer, if you're just struggling, you need some advice, some encouragement, we will stop the game. We will stop whatever it is to focus on you, because while we love our video games, we love you more. And so that's something we've been doing for 6 years now, I think. Yeah. So it was actually birthed out. Celeste was did a school ministry, and she was tasked with doing something outside of what she would normally do. So we created the Bible studies, and then we just kind of merged it in our regular streaming together.
Yeah, and I can attest they have stopped live play just for me and prayed for me before, so I can testify.
Yep. So we do that, and then we do have a new podcast coming out, by the way, called Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider Fan, which is hosted by one of our friends, and he's going through the history of Spider-Man. And this is the deal about all of our podcasts we have. While they're niched out, and so we have terrible movies, and I mean, we're talking about like Avatar: The Last Airbender, terrible, and then the Gundam Watch, all those. There's always a spiritual atmosphere to it. So while we'll talk about it, we'll laugh about it, we have a segment where we talk about spiritual aspects of it, things to encourage people, to bring hope and point people back to the hope of Jesus. because that is literally the whole thing for Geek Devotions. We're the show from devoted geeks who are devoted to letting people know they're loved. And so every time I have a team member who goes, "Hey, we want to do this," I'm like, "How does it fit the mission?" And if it doesn't, we're just not going to do it. And so that's what we do with all of our podcasts. And it was one of those things where we're one, because there's podcasts for all these geek cultural things, and a lot of them are foul and disgusting. So we're trying to make a space where it's okay. And so we do that. And then again, like we said at the front of the show, every Friday we have a devotion comes out on YouTube that is based in geek culture somehow, whether it's dealing with anime, video games, comic books, and they range from devotional type things to some instructional stuff. I did a whole discussion on Old Testament, New Testament, and talking about and relating it to the transition from PS4 to PS5. Just this is a new thing. We have a resource on our website now. We actually kind of self-published a curriculum. It's a 6-week curriculum for youth pastors and small group leaders that involves you doing a Mario Kart tournament with your community. And again, it's a 6-week curriculum that's completely free. You can download it from our Ko-fi account, and it talks about everything from the importance of being in a church, being in a community, to understanding our identity in Christ, to navigating spiritual road hazards.
And it's accessible too through your website, through geekdevotions.com.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
You can
Yeah.
get to the Ko-fi from the website.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just click on free resources, and it's all right there.
All the things, by the way, that we just said are going to be down in the show notes. So
Oh,
if you're a geek, if you are somebody who is interested in being a geek, or maybe you're just saying, look, Paul, I'm just a normal person, but I need information. I need things. I have students that need me to be, I need to know some things. Then all those resources are going to be there for you. If there's any other handles or anything that they need to know, any other things that they need to know where they can contact you?
Before I give you that, I want to plug one podcast. It's called Geeks Under Grace. It is a weekly show, and they break down geek culture every week, talking about the newest video games, movies, and stuff like that. Fantastic podcast. So if you're looking for just information, please check out our friends over at Geeks Under Grace.
Yeah.
But all of our handles, we're on Twitch, Instagram, Twitter. I'm sorry, X, TikTok, Threads, Twitch. It's all just Geek Devotions.
Well, guys, thank you so much. I want to thank you guys, first of all, for your heart for ministry. I want to thank you both for just loving Jesus and loving teenagers and loving those special geeky teenagers that need time and attention and some extra love sometimes. And you guys are providing that to your students. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for helping those youth pastors that are watching and listening maybe be more informed and better equipped to love those kinds of kids in their ministries.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.